showing baby Grant his love of trains. And this is my dad's very own train that you got when you were like 3 years old, right?
No, my first Christmas when I was 1 year old, actually.
One thing that we've been hiding about my dad, you've seen him at Universal Studios, you've seen him at Disney World, you've seen him on our Alaskan cruise, you've seen him take my nose ring out, but you haven't seen him in his true element. We've been keeping a secret from you. My dad loves trains. No, I mean my dad loves trains. No, my dad loves trains! You see, my dad has a really unique hobby, and we keep him in the basement.
Yep, I'm a model railroader.
Actually, aren't you considered a master model railroader?
Well, yes, I am, as a matter of fact.
And we're about to tell you all about what that means, because like I said, it's really unique.
So I've been working on this layout since about 1986. So you can imagine parts of it are going on almost 40 years old. I build almost everything myself. In this day and age, you can buy a lot of these metal cars and they're ready built. You can just take them out of the box and set them on the track, but I don't like to do that. I build them out of kits and different pieces. I've got, the railroad normally has 278 freight cars on it, 41 passenger cars, 20 steam locomotives at any given time, 51 diesel locomotives. I built and have 9 bridges going over 4 different rivers, the Weber River, the North Platte River, South Platte River. There's 145 buildings that I've built. The turnouts, or switches as people call them, there's 128 of those. 356 feet of main line. Now the main line would be like the interstate highway compared to city streets and country roads. And then another 446 feet of yards and sidings. So I started building this model railroad in about 1986 with this particular scene right here. And my type of model railroad is what's called a prototypical model railroad. I have buildings that are replicas of real buildings. The names, place names, and scenery all replicate the actual locations. This is the Union Pacific Railroad, Wyoming Division. We're standing here in my model of Cheyenne, Wyoming, both capital and headquarters of the Union Pacific Railroad across the state of Wyoming. Union Pacific was the first railroad that was built all the way across the United States, and they were involved in the driving the Golden Spike. So Cheyenne, Wyoming is the capital of the state of Wyoming and has some very unique structures. This building here is a model of the station that's still in Cheyenne to this day, and it's now the Wyoming State Transportation Museum. Now that's called selectively compressed. That's not built to scale because the structure would be about this long and I wouldn't have room for it in the layout, so it's built to a smaller scale. There's a backdrop with the state capitol. All these buildings have the proper signs and names and color paint schemes of the buildings that are still there in downtown Cheyenne today. So I went to college at the University of Wyoming in Laramie, Wyoming. This particular part of my layout duplicates downtown Laramie, Wyoming. There's the Union Pacific Passenger Station, and that is a model that's called scratch built. I built that out of nothing but raw materials to the dimensions and size and color scheme to look like the real station does in downtown Laramie. Here is the main street in Laramie, and you can see a lot of these structures are made and painted to look like those buildings as well. Now most of those were made out of kits, a kit that you'd buy the box and glue the pieces together with an instruction. This coal dock here was basically a toy model that I took all apart and completely modified to look much more realistic and like the one that sat in Laramie, Wyoming. The cement plant there to your right is what's called kit bashed. I scratch built some pieces out of nothing but raw materials. I bought pieces from different kits and different models and put them together to resemble the Laramie Valley Cement Plant in Laramie, Wyoming. This is a model of the world's largest steam locomotive. It's called the Big Boy. 600 tons, 145 feet long, 8,000 horsepower. The Union Pacific actually just rebuilt one of these to run it for historical purposes, public relations, and it's the largest operating steam, always was the largest operating steam locomotive in the world. It's my favorite. So this is the town of Wasach on the border of Wyoming and Utah. So you'll notice here, there's scenes where the buses are pulling up and changing customers going from one town to another. Now I'm going to take you to a section of my layout that I'm very proud of. You very rarely see a winter scene on a layout, and it's because it's kind of hard to replicate. But this area here is called the Utah Canyons. It's the Weber River. This geographic structure over here is called Devil's Slide. This area is called Taggart's with the mountains and the peaks and the rocks in the background. And to this day, the Union Pacific Railroad still runs through this canyon. But I took foam, carved the foam to look like those mountains, then put a thin layer of like a paper mache over it and painted it. So that's all made out of foam. Now the snow is made out of an artistic paste that I put little flecks of sparkles in. And every now and then you catch the glint off the snow, which is what makes it look a lot more realistic. If you just paint something white, it doesn't look realistic because you don't see the sun reflecting from it. But I love winter scenes, and you can see I got a beaver dam here, a beaver lodge, I got a moose, and the beaver's gnawing down the trees. And every now and then I got to come down and feed the beaver something else, otherwise they're going to cut down all my trees. So now this is a pretty sophisticated feature of model railroads that most people have a hard time understanding. But a long time ago, there was a famous model railroader who was involved in theater in the 50s. The name was Frank Ellison. And he invented this process called staging yards, where if an actor's waiting to go on stage to play his part, he's standing in the wings, he's standing off the side of the stage. Well, that's what these yards represent. These trains are representing other towns, Denver, Colorado, or North Platte, Nebraska, or Ogden, Utah. And they're off stage, they're waiting to come onto the railroad to play their part, if you will. So this device here is what's called a CTC panel, centralized traffic control, and this is the sort of control that a railroad dispatcher would have 100 miles away from the railroad that he's actually running. This monitor I have, so I can see trains on the other side of the mountains, which route they're coming on, this upper route or the lower route that's hidden here in this tunnel. Or it also will show me a train coming through Laramie, Wyoming. When I know if there's a train coming in there, I need to get these tracks ready in a line for it to come the rest of the way into these staging units later on. So my railroad is controlled by what's called a DCC System, Digital Command Control. The brand that I use is Digitrax, and this is one of the computers that operates the layout. I have wireless controllers that work through a wireless network, and what you do is you enter the address of the locomotive that you have programmed in. I generally use the number of the locomotive itself. So this locomotive is 3983. Enter that, and now I can control all the features on the railroad, on the locomotive. For instance, the whistle, the bell, turn on the headlight. Now you can also program the way the train actually runs. You can program it for momentum, like it's pulling a much heavier train. You can program it so it accelerates very slowly. You can program it so it will automatically make certain sounds under certain circumstances. There are 36 different functions that you can individually program on each of these locomotives. And what you do is you install a decoder like this. This one's made by a company in Durango, Colorado called Soundtrax. So one of these is installed in here. Hear that? Now the other thing is the ultimate goal that you have for a model railroad like this is what's called an operating session. Well, I get my friends together once a month or so, and we basically play a board game. It's like Dungeons and Dragons for real, would be the easiest way to describe it. So we have 28 different trains. Each train has a name and a list of instructions, what it's supposed to do. Each train has a list of cars that you either set out at a factory or a cement plant, or pick up at a refinery or a grain elevator. There's one of these little yellow cards for each car, and inside is what's called a waybill. And it tells you exactly where this car is going and what you're supposed to do with it. And as a result, everybody works together to try and run this thing smoothly. Now, you've got to run the trains properly. You got to avoid mechanical problems. You've got to avoid logistical mistakes. And you have to pay close attention to what you're doing. Nobody wins this game, but at the end of the night, if you've got a great operating session, it's a lot of fun, and people do it very realistically. That's kind of the ultimate game.
Some of my favorite elements of the layout since I was a child is the cattle farm. And if you listen carefully when I flip the switch, you'll hear mooing. The haunted house, complete with a little trick-or-treater and a jack-o'-lantern. The lake. Now, water is actually a very tricky element for model railroaders to master, and my dad and my grandpa were very good with their water. And there's a little goose. Swan. What is that? The sugar beet factory with a working gate. If you're driving along this route and you get tired, you can stop in for a stay at the Wigwam Hotel, and you can even bring your little dog, who's modeled after our dog Benji, who stayed with us in real life at the real Wigwam Hotel. And a new addition in the last several years is this eagle. I'll just turn on the neon light and have some applause.
Have you with us and be our guest tonight?
Thank you so much, Jim. It's always a pleasure to work with an entertainer like you.
Well, thank you, ma'am. Now tell us what you'd like to say.
Okay, and two funny stories from my childhood that I'll never forget is one, I was down here playing when I was like 8, and I'm sure my dad talked about it, but you have to weather things so it looks old. And so this roundhouse is weathered with dust. I wrote my name in it because I just thought it was regular dust. And my dad was like, "What did you do? I worked so hard to make it dusty." And he had to completely re-weather the whole roundhouse. And the second thing that made my dad so mad for weeks is our neighbor's cat would come into our house and we would let him in. And he came down in the basement and walked around and punched holes on accident in the mountains because he was just walking around. My dad had a lot of repairs for that.
It wasn't by accident, it was a devil cat. So this display case has some unusual locomotives and models in it. Many of these engines here belong to my dad. Now these don't have all the advanced electronics that mine do, and it's very difficult to make them work on a model railroad like mine. But my dad had these in the 60s and 70s that he ran. His favorite railroad was the Great Northern. They had this beautiful green boiler, red cab roof paint scheme with a Rocky Mountain goat, which was his favorite animal. This model here is a model of the first locomotive that the Southern Pacific, or Central Pacific in those days, had, and this is a very rare locomotive here. That's just too fragile and too delicate and too complex to actually operate. These are a different scale. This is what's called S scale, as opposed to my layout, which is HO. And this is a little bit larger scale. These are specific models of Colorado narrow gauge railroads, like many of you may have heard of the Durango and Silverton narrow gauge. These are some other F scale models. This is an O scale model. That's 1/48, twice as big as the models in my layout. So these are just some of my favorite collectibles. My mom loved collecting railroad dining car china, and this was all some of her collection I like to display here as well.
How can anyone reach you in case they need any help or questions?
Well, I'm a member of the National Model Railroad Association. My email address is bradjoseph3985@gmail.com. I'm involved in conventions, both national and regional and local model railroad conventions.